Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar series, Embracing Change. This month, we've got a few guests coming in, dear friends and colleagues of FBN, to talk about family business. And today, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship in family businesses and how supportive and also challenging it can be as you come in to a very well-oiled machine, I would say, or structured. And especially when you're second gen. I think third gen is a little different, but maybe, let's see, we'll find out. So thank you, Henry. Thank you, Johnson, for joining me today. Really appreciate it. It's 9 o'clock in Hong Kong, so thank you for being up and running and right at this time of the hour. So let's begin. I think, why don't we just introduce yourself so that people have a little bit of background as to where you are, how far you've come, and what you've been up to, and then we'll get into some of the juicy stuff. So Johnson, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Faisal, for having me on the show. I feel like I'm on the Jimmy Fallon show. I'm Johnson, and I'm the second gen of real estate family. I joined my family business in 2014 after getting my MBA at Cornell. And I subsequently took over an e-commerce company under the family business and turned it around. We grew from 0 GMV to 186 million RMB per year and became strategic partners of JD.com Ping An Bank. I then left to start my own private equity firm, Voyager Capital, under my father's family office. And we're now focusing on investing in artificial intelligence and enterprise SaaS startups across the globe. We've invested in companies like Fiscal Note, Food Truck Alliance, AutoX, etc. And our goal is to do well and do good with AI. It's certainly been a roller coaster ride, and I'm happy to share more about it. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Johnson. Thank you. That was very quick, very efficient. Henry, you can slow it down if you want. You don't have to be as efficient as Johnson.
Oh, I can keep it quick too, so we can talk about the interesting stuff. Hello, everybody. My name is Henry Chong, and I'm the CEO of Fusang. And we're a company that focuses on building digital asset infrastructure. You'll have heard of things like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, etc., that are all the rage right now. And our focus has always been on taking the same underlying blockchain technology that powers assets like Bitcoin, but using it to represent real world assets like shares, bonds, and funds. In addition, my family business is a company called the Portcullis Group, where for the last just over 35 years now, we focused on helping families and similar institutions in terms of what I call the plumbing of the financial system, helping them set up companies, trusts, corporate structures, looking after their family offices, and etc. And maybe as a gentle way to kick off tonight's theme, talking about innovation, to give a bit of history about Fusang, we started off initially as an offshoot of the family business. Looking at providing additional services like fund management to some of the families that we look after. And in 2017, I got very interested in buying Bitcoin out of one of our regulated funds. And we decided that we couldn't. And missing a lot of infrastructure in the industry. And for a variety of reasons decided that we should embark on this journey to build out some of that infrastructure ourselves, because we said, hey, we do very similar jobs for traditional assets. We act as custodian and fund administrator, for example. Can we apply those same skills and do, in principle, a very similar job for this exciting world of digital assets? And that's really how Fusang got to where we are today.
All right, let's get a little juicier. Henry, come on, it couldn't have been that smooth and that easy. So when you were not able to invest into crypto or Bitcoin, and you came up, okay, let's solve this. Let's solve this ourselves, and let's create a way for that other family offices or other families or other individuals, are able to do what you couldn't do, right? So maybe Johnson wanted to do the same thing, but his structure also didn't allow it, right? So how was the idea, like, play us through a little bit how it came about, like what happened, the supportive parts, and maybe not the so supportive parts.
Yeah. Well, I I sometimes, and not entirely jokingly, say that I think entrepreneurs make two key decisions. The first is you look at a unique problem and you think that you have a solution to that problem. And I guess often is the case, you have that issue yourself, and that's why you go out and you try and solve it. And I think entrepreneurs make a second key mistake, which is to say, how hard can it be? And that usually sets you off on this long and winding path, and inevitably it's always harder than you think. But you probably would never have started if you had known how long and winding the path would have been to begin with. And I see Johnson nodding furiously. And you know, when we first started looking at the digital asset world, we quite naively thought, look, we have a lot of experience in terms of running regulated financial institutions. We know in theory how these jobs are done for traditional assets. All we need to do is go out, find the technology partner, and we're off to the races. That turned out to be way harder than I could have imagined. Certainly back in 2017, when we started this journey, nobody had what I would call production-ready technology, meaning nobody had tech that was actually willing to be ready to be deployed, certainly not in an institutional sense that we had in mind. And we ended up making the decision to build out some of that technology ourselves, which again, as any of you know who have actually tried to build technology platforms, takes way more time and effort and is way harder than you think. But I think that meant that we today own and operate not only the companies and the financial entities, we actually own and operate the technology stack that underpins it, which has been massively beneficial for us because we today run a very diverse platform, right? Doing lots of different jobs in the digital asset industry. And again, all of this started because we said, there are a bunch of gaps, there are a bunch of holes. Someone somewhere needs to build it. Why shouldn't it be us? So, and just in brief, I mean, we set up things like custody. We went out and set up a stock exchange, which again, way harder than I could have imagined for a lot of different reasons. And as I said, I think a lot of this is a bit of luck, but also sometimes you need that healthy dose of that naive spirit almost to say, hey, we think we can do this, where someone perhaps with a bit more foresight might have said, well, this is too hard a problem to solve. But sometimes I think it requires that spirit in order to try and tackle these problems, because most people aren't willing to even engage precisely because they focus on the obstacles and the challenges, as opposed to just focusing on the end outcome, as I call it, and saying, hey, there's a job to be done for customers. One of those customers includes ourselves. Can we go out and try and build a solution for it?
All right. Thank you, Henry. That was a true entrepreneurial journey sharing. But I think we're going to come back to you, and I want you to reach down in your heart and your gut to come up with a little bit of the juicy part of as to the support and the lack of support you got during the journey, especially when you realize that, whoa, this is not as linear as I thought. This is not going to be a straight line, as we all know as entrepreneurs. And then, sometimes the family members are supportive, and sometimes they can be, a little more challenging to deal with when they don't really understand what is needed and why you needed to start from scratch. So just ponder on that thought. And Johnson, why don't you walk us through a bit of the ride? I know you've shared with me that that experience of doing that turnaround and how things kind of went a little differently than you expected during the exit. So share a little bit of that journey, Johnson.
Sure. Before that, I wanted to put a name to what Henry said about that spirit of almost that gutsiness. It's in I think in Hebrew it's called chutzpah. And when we visited Tel Aviv, they kept telling us that it's all about chutzpah. So it's that spirit of just doing it, just go ahead and do it, and not worry about criticism or the challenges ahead. And I think that itself, the naivete about the challenges ahead is itself perhaps a weakness, but also a strength. Because as you said, if we know all the challenges that we would face, we would have never started. For us, I'd like to present ourselves as more of a logical, strategic history, a plan that we put in place, that therefore we worked it out and got to point B from point A. But that's not how it actually happened, as all of you know. And so in the beginning, I chose private equity real estate as the segment that we should work on at Voyager, simply because my family is in real estate and real estate makes money. And I thought it would be easier for me to leverage my family resources, network, and expertise to do it. It was a logical choice, but it wasn't like I was extremely passionate about it. But we started in it, and I worked alongside my father, who's very supportive in the beginning. I mean, he couldn't be more supportive, but nonetheless, for a variety of reasons, mostly due to my inexperience in private equity real estate. It's one thing to start, apply for a license, it's quite another to operate a private equity business. I wasn't able to close deals. And we looked at Canadian deals, we looked at deals in Las Vegas, but we ran into challenges. And in retrospect, I think that was a blessing in disguise, because I narrowly escaped the impact that COVID would have had on my portfolio if I had then invested in those deals. I think my father had really high hopes that I would succeed, given my education and my previous experience and the things that I tell him. And it was very frustrated by my failure. I would liken it to, buying a 4K Samsung TV and bringing it home and it not working for, after half an hour of trying to set it up. And it's just really frustrating for him. And he had to foot the bill. So it culminated in a huge fight. As a good Asian son, I don't actually fight back. But that time I felt I was backed in the corner and I fought back. And that became a turning point for Voyager. We pivoted to tech, and that was the right decision for us. And coming from a family business with substantial resources meant that a lot of next gens also carry tremendous expectations to succeed. But as my story illustrated, life isn't an equation, and it doesn't always work out. And we had to admit failure, and that was hard. We had to pick ourselves up and do something we're passionate about. So that's our story at Voyager.
So when you said, thank you for being, for sharing so personally. When you said fight, like what if without obviously crossing the line, can you share like what did that mean? Was it because you're this, like a lot of the Asians, you go to these top schools, you come out, you've got expectations of the wazoo. Was it that? Was it, my son? Like what was it? Was it, like he burst his bubble? Like what? Tell us a little more.
It was a combination of both, for sure. And he was very worried that I don't have my career set up right. And he was worried that I wasn't making it. And he felt that, obviously I was called, I remember that day, I was called into his office and he said, "What are you doing?" The tone and the tenor of the conversation implied that I was twiddling my thumbs. I was doing that on the weekends, but not during work days. But I explained to him and I said, and I think I was a bit reactive, I was overly emotional at that point. And I said, "Do you think I'm sitting on my, rear end doing nothing? And I'm looking at this deal in the States, and I explained the business model and I walked through the technology. I think it's a great deal. I'm looking at it." And usually he would cut me off and scream back. But that time he actually listened to my whole pitch while I was angrily pitching it. And I was surprised and shocked. I was astonished, quite frankly, when after my venting, he actually said we should invest in the company. Because I think he saw how passionate I was about the deal and about tech. So that was a turning point for us. I said, I didn't know that it was possible for us to invest in tech because my father is very, very traditional. And that was the beginning of Voyager pivoting to tech. Even to this day, actually, I'm very grateful that we had that honest conversation, although it was a little too heated for my liking.
So even though that happened, but he was open to the tech. Did he understand the tech, or did he just trust you with the tech? Like, does he really get it?
He understood it. Like,
really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
I think
amazing.
For a second there, I thought something was off, because I never had that kind of conversation. And I thought, like, every time I tell him tech, it would be disappointing because we're in real estate. So that time when I explained everything to him, and in 5 minutes, and I talked rapidly, he was quite taken aback, and he actually bought into it. So I thought that was a great story. But there is another funny story that attached to it.
Okay, go ahead.
Which was, he said we should put $1 million into it. And I said, sure. And then I went to the CEO and I said, we're going to put $1 million into your company. And then 2 days later, my father called me into his office and said, we should diversify, right? So I said, sure. So I had to actually put in my own money into the deal, and
Okay.
and so kind of fill the gap and help diversify my father's holdings. But I'm grateful that happened, because the company then, I think it grew, it quadrupled basically. So I also made a few bucks.
Okay, so he asked you to put skin in the game.
Yes, he did. Well, he didn't, but he asked me to diversify, which there was no way to diversify unless I put skin in the game.
Henry, what a polite way to say put skin in the game, diversify. Were any of those words used when you were building up, Henry? Diversify. I like that. That's a very beautiful way. They should teach it at Harvard. Please diversify in your family business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess our Fusang as a project is a little similar in the sense, right? We and even within the digital asset industry, right? The reason why we've always focused on this, being able to take real world assets like shares and put them on blockchains, is precisely because that's what the core family business does. And our core business is heavily based on people, and it's based on paper. I don't think a lot of people realize just how much paper gets churned out when you incorporate a company or issue shares or anything like that. And someone somewhere is usually helping you hit print on a printer. And I think we realized that anything based on people and based on paper in the 21st century is probably not long for this world, and that we better go out and try and do something and disrupt our own business, as it were, before someone else does it for us. So I guess you can think of it as diversification, right? Not into a different industry, but in terms of approach, business model, I think you can call it. And I guess I'm very grateful that I think the family, you can call it that, my father certainly has always been very supportive of what we're doing as an idea. Where I think it's been a little more challenging is in, number one, trying to get a lot of very traditional looking clients to say, yes, I want to also come along and adopt new business models with you. And also getting a lot of staff in the traditional family business to want to come along to that idea as well. I think as family businesses, families in business, it's very easy to think about everything as one big pot, right? You say, hey, look, these are all our businesses. I don't really care which ones do well or not. As Johnson was saying, diversify, right? And as long as they diversify, it's all ours. And of course, people that are actually working in certain businesses don't see it that way, right? And they have strong vested interests in terms of making sure that traditional businesses continue in traditional way. And likewise, I've always been surprised by people on the other side, clients, right? Even if you come to them with new ideas or say, hey, we can help you do things in a better way, not always such an easy conversation, right? There is very, very strong bias towards people wanting to do things the way they always have, especially when those things have worked. I'm not just talking about the company, but clients of companies too, right? You just say, hey, it's working, everything is fine now, don't touch. So I think if anything, the family, you can call it that, has always been the most entrepreneurial, the most willing to kind of push ahead and do things. And our challenge has been, how do we get all these different stakeholder groups, both internally in the companies and also external stakeholders, to want to come along for the ride?
So Henry, let's go a little more into detail. Thank you for that. How many of the original team is actually part of this new expansion, right? Just to get an idea, are there a number of them, and how much impact has this new, diversification impacted the traditional business? Let's look at both of these.
So, I mean, it's a different team, right? Something we did very consciously from day one, right? Setting this up as a whole separate thing. Again, I guess you can say it's just as good diversification.
Okay.
And I think our plan was always to run things a little bit in parallel, rather than necessarily trying to metamorphose directly the existing business, which is never easy. You know, I think, and I see parallels with a lot of big companies where they are trying to think about how do you do what people call like corporate venture capital. We know we need to innovate. We know we need to change our business model. Do we try and do it in the main business? Do we set up an offshoot? And I think there are tensions to doing both, right? Changing existing business model is not easy, but setting up an offshoot that's not quite part of the main thing, also never easy. And yes, right, it's been a different team, which I think sometimes has always led to tensions, challenges, trying to get different teams working together. Again, family might view this all as one big pot, but people don't always think of it that way. People will say, yeah, I'm looking at this one unit and I care mostly about this one unit. I think that's been a challenge. But yeah, I mean, also just trying to get clients of the traditional business as excited as we thought. We have a lot more interest and excitement, I think, from people who were not clients before. You know, so thankfully what we do, yeah, I mean, thankfully what we do today is like suddenly become the sexiest industry on the planet, right? Everyone everywhere is talking about it. And very interestingly, you know, digital asset industry generally is heavily driven by retail investors, right? So if you talk to someone under the age of 25 today, chances are a majority of your investable net worth is invested into some form of digital asset. And there's a damn good chance it's like NFTs and stuff, which I find even quite adventurous. So it's very interesting in that suddenly you have this industry that, you know, you think of most emerging industries as only touching a very small number of people first. Whereas in our industry, actually you have this case where it's actually become mass market without institutions entering the market. So I think that's probably something we didn't expect initially, that actually a lot of the traditional client base wasn't the ones that wanted to jump on the bandwagon. It was people who are just totally new, right? The people out there, so to speak, that have suddenly come in and said, hey, this is the future.
So straight to C, not B to C. You went, it happened to go straight to C. Now, did any of those C's translate to the core Portcullis business? Did they come into that? Was that an expansion that happened as well that was unexpected?
I wouldn't say unexpected, right? That was always a plan, how you create technologies. But yes, right. I think it was always very interesting that just because you present something that you might perceive to be quote unquote better process, etc., doesn't always mean that people will come jump on it, right? The status quo effect, so to speak, is very real, right, and very powerful. Fascinating, I guess, for me to see, just not so much in the context of one company, but in our industry broader, right? Where, and I'm willing to bet a lot of people on this call today, for example, right, come from traditional businesses, traditional business models. I'm sure if you look at things like digital assets or crypto assets, you say, oh, I don't know, it's all very new. And on the other hand, I look at stats that say, you know, in a lot of countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc., 65% of people on the islands own digital assets. And again, if you're under the age of 25, that is basically the only thing that you invest in.
And how's the whole concept of paperless, of challenging that traditional business? Has Portcullis evolved as they watch you build this out, or are they still holding on to the old style of lots of paper, lots of signatures, a lot of printers?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's still a lot of that, and some of it is the way that existing companies' regulatory models work. It kind of necessarily needs to be like that, and I think that's part of the reason why when we set up Fusang as an entity, we wanted to almost leapfrog to a whole different model, because very genuinely trying to transform things in existing processes, especially in the context of regulation, not always easy. So again, I don't think any of that was unexpected. What I have found a bit surprising is that you have a lot of clients who also like traditional processes, just because I suspect it's a known quantity.
Okay, so they're holding on to that way of being.
People say, I like my paper, right?
Yeah.
Even if they've never actually seen the paper. I think a lot of people still like the concept of it floating around. So.
They feel safe, basically feel safe that they kind of understand it, right? And they're probably wondering what it would be otherwise. Okay. So Johnson, how has this whole new investment into AI, has it impacted the traditional business at all? Has it changed in terms of their ways? Do you see any impact? And is the team like Henry completely a separate team, or is there some overlap?
I think for us, it was difficult to borrow real estate folks to join an AI investment venture arm. I think that was too much of a stretch, but we do rely heavily on their administrative support. And I'm very grateful for all the support that they provide. We did, in fact, I did somehow convince my sister to join us as an advisor to my business. And it was her that brought in the AutoX deal, and she brought in some clients to us. So I think from the leveraging family resources standpoint, I did somehow manage to get my sister, who is a huge asset to my firm now. And I think that's the power of family business, right? You can always ask your siblings for help.
And in terms of, so not even, okay, I understand on the admin side. What about on the finance side? There wasn't a quote unquote watchdog that was kind of there to just keep an eye to see that things are in check, quote unquote, as per family guidelines or ways or whatever you want to call it. You can see Henry smiling. He didn't like the word watchdog. He didn't like that. He thought it was too real.
Yeah, he also didn't like the word paper. So on paper, we don't have to be regulated by the family office, but I think that it's the right thing to do, that we present in annual meetings what we're doing, how we're performing, so that they can keep us accountable. I'm not afraid that the family accountant will raise questions. Not at all, because it builds trust. The more transparent we are, the more governance structures we put in, and the clear accounting is, it builds trust. And that's why more family members from the extended family have come to us and say, can you manage our capital, for us? And I think that's really important. And sometimes the hard part is life is not always rosy. So sometimes the markets go up and they go down. So I find the harder part is not that they come back to us and say, oh, how did you spend that money? Did you buy too many mooncakes? The harder part was, when the stock prices, drop, or when there's a sudden issue with regulations or whatnot, how do you communicate and explain to the stakeholders in the family and say, hey, look, we're in this together. And I'm so thankful that my family has been so supportive throughout the past several months as we weather the storm in the markets.
Yeah. So it's Henry like that. He actually still uses the word accountant. That has to come from the family business side. I don't think anybody in this generation uses the word accountant, Johnson. Huh?
Oh, I think
no. At least he.
Soon.
Sorry, Henry.
Oh, I don't think accountants are going away anytime soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So they've been watching, especially in the last few months. I mean, we were on the junk together as FBN, and the paper had leaked, quote unquote, from the big boss's office. So all of those events that have happened in the last few months have impacted the numbers, right? Johnson, I assume, quite strongly. In which direction, up or down, in your case?
I think for us, we had our first IPO.
Oh.
And in June, so you can imagine the impact on our portfolio due to the regulatory uncertainties, but we have recovered ground. So we're now back at where we started. Although I also learned a valuable lesson in finding the right partners, because I'm very thankful that, our clients came to me and said, just calm down. It's all going to be okay. So it's the other way around. So even my sister came to me and be like, life is going to be okay. So just chill. So I'm very grateful for that. But it was difficult, and we did have to reevaluate our strategy for firms that could be impacted by regulations.
And also, I think the cycle, right? I mean, the real estate cycle is not as volatile, quote unquote, as what you're in. So they were able to play the long game within the short game because there's a lot of volatility in what you're doing, right?
That's right. That's right. And I'm very grateful that we have that part of the business because they've been quite resilient. And I think from my father's perspective and from the family business perspective, like that's also diversification. You don't want one investment strategy to impact the whole portfolio. You want sort of a diversification of strategies. Yeah, maybe we'll look into digital assets.
He's stretching his muscle, Henry, on screen. All right, everyone, we'd love to have your questions. We have 30 more minutes. I want to switch a little bit of gears right now, guys. So I want to talk about, one is the pressure. I know we didn't go into it. I mean, a lot of us Asians, end up in going to the right schools and then the right universities, quote unquote, you know what I mean by right, the Asian way, and then graduating, working outside and coming back and expected to crush it, right? Now, how does that feel personally? How was that from a personal perspective? I know today you're both doing very well and things are great, but when you were 20, 21, 22, I know when I came to Hong Kong, I was 23, worked in New York and came over. I mean, there's self-imposed and there's family imposed, not verbally, not spoken about, but still it's there. So whoever wants to go first.
I mean, look, there's always pressure, I think, and I think the nature of like a family business startup, let's call it, is that you have pressure on multiple dimensions. All three of us on this call, I call us, founder, owner, entrepreneurs, right? And I love having dinner with similar founder, owner, entrepreneurs because we can commiserate about all the same problems, and it's all the same. It doesn't matter if it's family business or not. All CEOs who actually own their company, I think you always have the same set of problems, and that is very different from being a professional CEO, right? When you're hired in to manage a company. And then when you overlay that with the fact that it's part of a family business and when it's an offshoot of a larger, like number one, that it's an offshoot of a bigger company and that company is a family business, obviously you have a lot of different dimensions. I think trying to start a new startup within a large corporation already has its own set of challenges. And I think that when you do that as part of a family business, like a lot of aspects of family business, there are always pros and cons, right? The benefit is that you have a family who can look at the greater picture as one single unit, right? Which is sometimes very rare in business, to have people who are so highly aligned with the company as a whole. But I think the other natural challenge, especially the young startup, is trying to make sure that we also operate that company as a startup. And that's something that I sometimes wonder for myself, where we've been very lucky to have a lot of support. We have a big safety net, and there's a lot of institutional synergies to being part of a larger family business. But I also wonder sometimes if that lessens the drive or the desperation, I guess you can call it. I have a lot of friends here in Hong Kong who are, again, similar own entrepreneurs who don't have that safety net, and just pivot their business to do whatever it needs to do, whenever it needs to do it, right? So they don't have those same expectations, never mind from the family, but and in terms of how the business should look and feel. You can operate with a bit more flexibility. And I think, we were talking last time, the three of us were on a call about, talking about Batman, Johnson, that second movie, third movie, or the Dark Knight third movie, where he's stuck in that cave in prison and he has to go and make the jump. And the guy tells him, you need to make the jump without the rope. And fear will find you again. That's how you do it. I think about that sometimes, because again, I think that with a lot of startups I know, it's all or nothing, right? You do it or you sink, and you do whatever it takes to make that thing a success. Whereas sometimes when you're part of a bigger group, there are other considerations at play.
No, but I think there's two parts, right? So let's break it down, Henry. One is, there is a bottom side security, right? that's there, but it also gives you an advantage to stay the course in the long game. Something's happening with my background. Sorry, guys. I'm in a hotel room in LA. Sorry about that. So how is that affecting it, Johnson? Did it affect your business? Or Henry, you want to go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess maybe just to give a concrete example, Fusang is very much a family business, owned and controlled by me and the family. But we also are a startup that has raised a whole bunch of external financing from other people. And even today, even though Fusang is still nominally a private company, haven't yet done an IPO, because of the way we have converted all of our shares into digital shares, we can take a fairly scalable cap table. So we have about 600 shareholders today. And again, that introduces its own set of tensions, right? Trying to answer to people who gave you money because they thought they'll make lots of money, versus also trying to manage that within the context of being an offshoot of a family business. And yeah, tensions, I guess, as always, right? And pros and cons to things. And I think you just need to manage them.
Johnson, how did that work for you? I mean, in terms of, you felt that because you had that downside, you were maybe not taking the risk or not pushing yourself, or was it actually able to give you a little more calmness and clarity, so that you don't, do those knee-jerk reactions, which some entrepreneurs do in a good way, and sometimes it's ends up not in a good way.
I think I'm certainly very blessed, even though I didn't go to Oxford.
Poor guy, Henry. He went to Cornell. Let's all feel for him. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, Johnson, we feel so bad for you. I'm sure there must be so much pressure that you didn't go to a better school, Johnson.
Yeah. And I do love my rope. So I absolutely, I think that sometimes I wonder if I have to lose that rope in order to thrive and really make it. But I remember I read about Elon Musk and how there were certain points in 2008 and he was almost not going to make it. And those are almost breaking points for him. I feel very blessed that I didn't have to go through those scenarios without a safety net. So I am very thankful for that. But there's one thing that I want to point out, and I want to quote another movie scene to illustrate my point. And that is, how there are some cheesy Hollywood movies about Kung Fu masters telling their students, like, your cup is full, like saying some philosophical stuff like that. And like, you got to empty your cup. And then all the Western audience was like, what does that mean? It's like, what is he talking about? So I kind of see that as sort of, we sort of sometimes when we go to, even if we graduate from college, my father never graduated from college. So for him, it's like whatever makes sense, right? Is what Henry says, do whatever it takes to make it. But for us that, went to formal education, especially in the States, we like to do things, the proper way, the way by the book. And I feel like actually there was a period of time when I said to myself, I actually have to unlearn and sort of empty my cup and just be open to it. Just because I learned it at Cornell doesn't mean anything, right? I just got to do whatever it works, and I need to learn. And so I think that revelation enabled me to just put down I would say the burden of expectations and that baggage, and for a second, be a real entrepreneur and sort of figure it out. And I think that was very liberating.
Johnson, I think that's an MBA thing too. Henry, do you agree? That's why I never did my MBA, but anyway, that's just an excuse. Harvard, Wharton, all of them won't be very happy listening to this webinar. They'll be like, oh, he's blasphemous. Go ahead, Henry.
Absolutely. And, I see there's a question in the audience, and let's talk a bit tangentially about that as well, sort of entrepreneur spirit, I guess you can call it. Does that come from families? Does it come from other places? I was just reading an article today in Wired magazine talking about how we're moving into an exponential age.
Yes.
People obviously talk about exponential returns and growth, especially in young tech companies. But the article is basically making the argument that, like it or not, what we call technology is not just software companies, right? To me, technology has always just meant doing new things in a better way, right? That's what innovation is, taking old processes and making them better. But of course, because of this collision of digitization, every industry everywhere suddenly is going to be subject to the vagaries of all this exponential growth. Basically summarize this whole article saying it's no longer a case of you want to have an entrepreneurial business because you make lots of money, but if you're not running an exponential business, you're going to be gone. Your lunch is going to be eaten by someone who can run that kind of business model. And as an example, he was talking about how Amazon, their R&D budget last year was $42 billion US, more than almost every country on the planet. And they spend something like 12% of gross revenue on R&D. So this is not money spent on IT or just keeping the wheels turning. It's we will take this money and experiment and develop new tech and see what happens. There aren't a lot of family businesses out there that can spend 12% of gross revenue on just burning it on R&D. But the point is, if there's a business out there in your industry that can afford to do that, at some point, if they get it right and they hit that exponential growth curve, you'll just be left behind. And I think that's why a lot of businesses, that not only do you need to innovate, you need to be thinking about radically new business models. And I think that's always the tension, right? It's if you have a existing business, you have the resources in order to go out and experiment, do R&D, innovate. But you also sometimes have the constraints of the big business, right? And ideally, you can both have big resources and the ability to be highly maneuverable and flexible. That doesn't always work like that, right? And you got to play off those two things. Whereas conversely, you're a young startup with no constraints, no attached business, no nothing. You can be highly, highly flexible, but you don't always have the resources in order to operate in the same way. And I say, I don't think this is just true of family businesses. I think it's true of every business, like every large business, incumbent business everywhere. I've always been fascinated by the fact that incumbent businesses, never, at least in technology industries, never ever seem to be able to innovate enough to make a sort of a technological leapfrog into the next gen of tech. Right? You look at the Nokias of the world and you say, these people have all the resources, they have every advantage. There's absolutely no reason why Nokia should not be the biggest phone company in the world today. But somehow, actually, when you look back on history, that's never the case. And if you were a betting man, you would say that the chance of an incumbent business today surviving tomorrow is very low. Because I don't know why, but when you look back in history, you say it just never seems to happen. Right? So if you were a betting man, you say the biggest businesses somehow do not seem to be able to innovate in such a way that lets them make that technological jump, I guess.
So maybe the family business with having kids like yourselves going to Oxford and Cornell might be a solution that most of the patriarchs, matriarchs of multiple generations don't think about, because you come back with these completely 0 to 1, like you talk about Peter Thiel, for them, like for myself, I'm much older than the two of you, and we grew up with scarcity, not abundance. We grew up with linear growth, not exponential growth, right? So, I've been running businesses where I've had to try my best to adjust to this new reality, Henry, that you speak about, right? But, the thing is, okay, my kids now are 18 and 20. Let's see what they come back with, right? And their thought process. But what you're bringing up is, I think, an advantage on the family business side, because you are investing in the next gen. You are thinking the long game. You are thinking generationally. You are thinking about longevity and continuity, right? And some form of succession. But I think we need to redefine, like you're saying, the meaning of succession to succession with disruption. Without disruption, succession may not, or longevity may not exist, right? I know most patriarchs and matriarchs might not be happy to hear this, but I think what you've brought up right there, Henry, is that that the family business actually is much better geared than Kodak, than Ericsson, and a few other companies that just are no longer, right, quote unquote, who they were, because they didn't listen to, in Kodak's case, the kid in the room who came to the board and talked about the digital age, right? Because he wasn't Henry Chong or Johnson, right? And it wasn't the mother or the father sitting at the board table saying, wait a minute, maybe my son needs to, let's give him some quote unquote piss money, right? Diversification, Johnson, as we put it, right? And let him go figure and let's see what happens. Because that's the 42 billion you're talking about, right? But it's a little different in the family business boardroom. Any comments? And then we'll take a look at these questions. What do you guys think? Do you think that's something that we need to talk about in the different forums?
Yeah. No, I mean,
go ahead, Henry.
No, I mean, I was going to say, I couldn't agree more. I think the biggest advantage that family businesses have is that you have a huge degree of alignments between owner and business, right? Operator often. And, not just family businesses. When you look at a lot of these large tech companies, I think the reason why they can operate the way they do is not because they're a tech company, it's because they're still owned and operated by founders who have a large degree of strong central control.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at a lot of banks, for example, again, you have all the resources, all the talents. It's just nobody owns most banks, right? People do not have that same drive to say, are we willing to invest today for something that may not pay out for years? And are we willing to invest in something today where we don't even know if it will pay out at all, right? There's uncertain ROI. Even though most people, these institutions recognize, as you're saying, in an era of kind of non-linear change, I would argue that succession today necessitates radical change, right? Almost by definition, if you do the same things tomorrow, what you did today, the chance of your business being around in 10 years' time is fairly low. So radical change needs to be built into that process.
And I think the next gen is a great solution, quote unquote, or at least a great incubation. Johnson, do you agree, or you feel?
I absolutely agree. And I think there's pros and cons in family business. The con is again, as Henry said, I think for existing businesses and incumbents, it's very difficult to change. And part of it is the fear of failure. They do not want to change, and because they don't want to lose what they already have. And one of the things I noticed working in the family business is that as the second gen, you cannot be, technically you can be fired, but you can't be fired, if you know what I mean. So that gives you kind of like a free pass to try. And if you fail, you get yelled at, but you're never like severed, excommunicated from the state. So I saw that as a free pass to try new things and to validate my chutzpah. And actually, I also use that to galvanize support within the family business to support what I was trying to do in e-commerce. But I also think that, going back to what you said, the $42 billion, that's sort of that I think there needs to be expectation that some part or major part of that money is going to be wasted, and it's going to have to pay for failures. So I think family businesses and corporations alike, they need to be ready for that. I've seen, unfortunately, I've seen a lot of family businesses struggle with coping with, what's going on, the exponential age, and what are we going to do? I liken it to, you've built a coal-fired power plant and you've been making money, and all you have to do is either make the coal, fire power plant more efficient by putting in more coal, or adjusting the yield or pay lower wages. But you're not a nuclear power plant. What Henry's mentioning is you need to build a nuclear power plant, and the people that build nuclear power plants, they're very different than those who build coal-fired power plants. I wanted to, is it okay if I answer some of the questions?
Yeah, let's go for it. I was going to suggest that we go to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to respond to the question about whether the entrepreneurial spirit is in the genes. My family, I can't speak for Henry, but my father is an entrepreneur. My family, the whole family, I think the extended clan, 80%, 80 to 9% of us are entrepreneurs, and it's just a family culture. Like if you're a male, a member of the family, and you work for somebody else, that's almost looked down upon. So even if you just have a small business and you're barely making it, that's still respected. So that's still very encouraged but not all families are like that. I think it was just the way we were brought up and our cultural values that, we had to be entrepreneurs in the family. There was a second
You
question.
had to be entrepreneurs. You had to be entrepreneurs. It was.
We had to be entrepreneurs. We're all entrepreneurs, especially the male members of the family. So it's very sort of traditional in that sense.
You might have asked a question, Johnson, because one thing I've always found very interesting when I look at a lot of family businesses is that sometimes you've got a very strong matriarch who runs now a very large business, who sometimes is very resistant to innovating. Right. I'll be honest, I have a lot of friends who come from family businesses and they complain about how their businesses don't innovate, right? Don't get to set up offshoots and etc. like we have. And I find that interesting because almost by definition, the patriarch and matriarch was such a radical entrepreneur that they could go from nothing to creating this massive business. It wouldn't have existed if they hadn't operated in that mode. But somehow it seems to change, right? When you become big and king of the hill, and then, I don't know, I guess that drive goes away, maybe. I don't know if you have any insight about why that happens.
I think that I have 2 points to make. One is that we have to continuously learn, and we can't stop learning. Often what happens that I'm seeing is that, the patriarch or matriarch have succeeded tremendously and have built up that wealth. And that wealth validated their way of doing things and their philosophy and their understanding of the era that they're in and how they can make it. But, let's say somebody who built a factory and made a fortune in the past 30 years, riding on the opening up of China, they need to radically change the way that they're seeing the future. And I feel like a lot of them are not willing to step out of the comfort zone, just because they're a little older and they don't want that change. But which is where I think the second gen step in and say, we need to take increasingly more risk and innovate and disrupt ourselves, or else somebody else will do it. I think Hong Kong is full of examples that have been disrupted by new technologies. Yeah, but the second point I want to make is that family businesses can do it much easier now than before. I mean, it's so much easier to use technologies like your platform or technologies like AI. It's so much easier to use enterprise SaaS now than before. So I think the transition should be easier.
Okay, so you feel that the shift is not as challenging as before. You don't need to build from scratch like the old days to go into a new space. Yeah, all right, we'll go a little different here. So one of the questions is, how do you balance emotions and operations between making decisions at the dinner table and one that is transparent at the boardroom? Well, Henry, for you, you're now physically away from your family. It's already been a year and a half, well, almost a year and 9 months now, which I know has been very challenging. So maybe a little different of a response, but maybe before that, before you were not able to travel, how, and Johnson, of course, you're in the same city, so yours is real. Henry?
I think my personal view is you shouldn't try. Family businesses are unique for a reason. There's no point trying to pretend like they're not. And the whole point is that you do need to do both, right? There is both the family element and the business element. I think you need to just embrace that. Just like, me personally, never mind the family side, just as a owner, entrepreneur of a young startup, I don't think there's always a big difference between business and personal, right? It's all getting very blurred, including in today's world. I do a lot of these webinars and I tell people I'm a massive introvert. I don't actually like being in front of camera. I don't like having to spend half my day talking on Zoom, but I do it because I think that's just what you need to do in today's world. If you are the CEO of a company, your face needs to be on social media. If you don't, I don't care what industry you're in, you could be in private equity, real estate. I'll bet my bottom dollar that in 10 years, someone else will come along and eat your lunch, because humans respond to humans. That's what we do, right? If you look at stats on social media, people follow people. They don't follow brands, right? There's no point even trying. Richard Branson has 100 million followers on LinkedIn. Virgin has like 2 million. Nobody cares, right? So like it or not, you are the face of the company and you need to push that out there. And I think that's doubly true of a family business, right? People respond to the name above the proverbial door. And I think that a family both needs to embrace that role as totemic leaders, if you can call it that, and also understand that you are a family in business together and be able to embrace and navigate that. I actually think it's a big mistake to try and pretend like it's not a family business. Then you get all the downsides with none of the upside.
No, I agree 100%, Henry. It's the same thing with work-life balance, right? Work is part of life, right? It's all one. And this whole idea to separate and then to create that guilt and to create that heaviness or that one versus the other, it's just enough is enough, right? And I agree 100% with you, Henry, that it's all encompassing. But I think they're talking about balance, which, is a tricky word, right? It's not, it's all one, but what they're referring to also is that doesn't take over the dining table, right? And that there are other conversations that are possible. But then Johnson would know it is possible because he has 2 kids, right? And they take over the dining table, right, Johnson?
Well, yes. Now that I have 2 kids, I've learned that they should say hi to grandpa before I start reporting on the stats. It helps a lot. It sets the tone. But I think, I've certainly struggled in finding where that line is. At certain points, I have doubted the existence of that line, as if I was doubting the existence of black holes. That line has to be very carefully drawn, because when your boss is also your father and he wants to talk about something, you don't dictate the terms at the dinner table. You report in 3 bullet points why you're a good bet. So I've certainly struggled, but I think it would also be helpful, and I'm trying to set boundaries and say, there are certain places, certain and I think for our generation, it's a lot easier to set boundaries. I said, after 10 o'clock, please don't talk about work, right? But it's a lot harder to do it with the older generation, especially with the patriarchs, because, when they're worried about something, they want that explained. I remember when I was living with my father and working in the family office, so I would see him in the office and at dinner and at night. I would come home. Sometimes I would come home late and he would ask me to report to him 12 a.m. in the morning, right? If you're working in a corporation, that would never happen. But I had to go
Well, it depends who your boss is.
Yeah. So I had to go upstairs and just report to him. And by the time I come down, I was like, I'm so tired. There's no division between, there's no work-life balance, because work is life, as he said, Feisal, and it's invasive.
No, but I meant it's a subset. I'm not saying work is life. Please, that's not it's a subset of life, right? It's all within one. It's not one versus the other. But I think you're right. It's how do we create the boundaries, right? And also what you're going to come up with. Maybe we'll have a conversation, in our next webinar, is about obligation, right? And that's what I think you're referring to, is that you feel obligated. But it's also because you want it to get off their chest, right? They're waiting to tell you. It's not because it's midnight. It's you showed up at midnight, Johnson. Come on, think of it from a patriarch's perspective. It's not his fault that you weren't home till midnight, right? That was your decision. Right, Henry? What do you think? Henry's not saying anything because he hasn't seen his parents for 1 year and 9 months. So he's there's pros and cons to both. All right. We have a question. We can do it quickly, and then I want you to just wrap up with a sharing. What are the 1 to 3 lessons you think every 20-something-year-old next gen ought to learn to help them in their personal and professional life? Maybe one idea each. One personal, one professional? This is 20 something, so a little earlier than you now. This is your last 10 years, Henry.
Well, I remember what it was like to be a younger 20-something.
Okay.
I remember what it was like to walk into rooms and people would go, "Oh my God, you're so young." And now I tell people how old I am and they go, "Yeah." I'm not quite sure when that happened, but I guess, well, maybe I can go first. One thing off the top of my head, a bit of both personal and professional, that I've come to realize is, when I was younger, I had less experience, right? And now I have a bit more experience, and that's nice to feel like you know a bit more what you're doing. But I think actually the most important thing I've learned is that most people have no idea what they're doing. And especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to do something new, no one's ever done this before. No one knows what the hell they're doing, and everyone's just trying to figure it out as they go along. And when you actually spend time grappling with a problem, you recognize that a lot of people have not actually dug very deep. And then if you've actually taken the time to try and solve something, you can very quickly have a lot more expertise than most people. But it doesn't even really matter. As I said, I think I've just come to realize that in life, you need to sometimes ride a bit easier in the saddle. And all of the people with quote unquote experience, or people who run big companies, or even patriarchs and matriarchs of big family businesses, everyone's just figuring it out as they go along.
Exactly.
And just to stress less on that, I suppose.
I guess they have.
And I think it's both personal and professional, right?
Yeah.
As I said, to me, at least, I sometimes struggle to keep the two separate. And I think I've realized that, just don't worry about it so much. I totally understand the pressure when you're in your early 20s, when you feel like you need to prove yourself, and you need to prove yourself in a room of much older people. And I said, I've come to realize that as long as you know what you're talking about and you've genuinely done your homework, trust me, you probably know a lot more than those people do, and they're just pretending.
Yeah, and they have a scorecard, right? And that's what gives them the leverage many a times, right? The scorecard, as Henry Johnson said, is the machine that's running, right? That's been running for decades. That gives them that, Johnson?
I think what I wish I had known when I was in my 20s would be that I needed to spend the time and build trust with the elders in the family, with my father and with my uncle. I felt that when I was in my 20s, I felt I really wanted to perform, as Henry said, and I wanted to prove myself. But in a family business, I think the most important thing for someone entering the family, or a next gen coming back and working for family business, is to build trust with the patriarch or the matriarch. And that trust takes maybe 2 to 3 years to build. And without that trust, it's very difficult for you to do start new businesses, or even talk about disrupting, or innovating. But once you have that trust, then it's a lot easier to carry out the vision that to realize the vision that you have in mind. So I would say that, take the time to build that trust and put in the effort.
Maybe just to expand quickly on what Johnson says, I think one of the best ways I've experienced to build that trust is to be vulnerable with people, and to recognize that we all have the exact same problems. I guarantee everyone in this call here who's a founder from a family business or an entrepreneur, everyone has the exact same worries, the exact same problems. And to me, there's no better way of building trust than by being honest about those things, and saying, hey, we're all just figuring this out as we go along.
Yeah. So Johnson, Henry, we're a little over time, but I want you to just, one last sharing. I mean, it's been incredible. Thank you for being so vulnerable, as Henry just shared, right? Sharing some of the, some of the experiences you had, good and a little challenging, so that other people can relate. And I think that conclusion, Henry, of being the disruptor or the innovator and having that advantage of a family business next gen coming in, I think that should be something that I'm going to be speaking at the family business program in IMD in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to bring that into it as part of well-being, right? That leadership of the next gen. I think that's going to be beautiful. So any last sharings you'd like to do before we call it a night, and for me, the beginning of the day?
Johnson?
I'll go first then. I think it's really important to also have a community of next gens and community of family business to share together. You're not alone in this journey. And as Henry said, perhaps others are sharing similar struggles. So it's very important to be a part of a community that supports each other and that shares in the struggles, and they can resonate with that. I think I certainly enjoyed my time at the Family Business Network. So I strongly encourage all of you to look for communities and groups that could support your journey.
Henry?
Absolutely. I think one thing I've learned and thinking a lot about very recently is, just to try and have a little bit of fun along the way. I know, again, I'm very sure most people on this call, you're owner, entrepreneurs, founders, and sometimes these things can feel like very life or death.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are, but still, you might as well enjoy the ride as you go along. Otherwise, what's the point? Holding on more tightly or stressing more doesn't really change anything. So.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. So thank you, Henry. Thank you, Johnson.
Thank you
for staying up so late. Now you can, you have 2 more hours before you report to your dad, Johnson.
Yeah. Thank you, Faisal. This is wonderful. Thanks for this.
You. So thank you for the sharing. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope that I'm sure Henry and Johnson were able to share some aha moments, even though maybe, like Henry said, same on one hand, but it's always good to hear, like Johnson said, within the community, and that's what we're trying to build here together, right? That to share so that we don't feel that it's, we're on our own, and it's we have others that we can learn from or get guidance from as we journey through this experience of family business and next gen and entrepreneurship. So again, thank you very much. Really an honor and privilege. And I'll see you soon in Hong Kong. And thank you, everyone. Next week, we've got a dear friend of mine, Carlos, coming in, who's actually in the process of moving to chairman of Alibhai, which is a big pharma firm in Spain. And we'll hear about his journey. And I think the both of you will relate very dearly in terms of how he's, what his journey has been like to move towards that position. So again, thank you. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Johnson. Thank you, everyone. And wish you a good night, good afternoon, or good morning, like myself, as we begin the day. All right. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Faisal. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Henry. Bye.
Thank you.